Every moment in life has the potential to be phenomenal. At Amy Boyle Photography, we specialize in capturing those moments, whether it's for your business, a milestone event, or a personal portrait. As the host of the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, I know the power of storytelling, and I bring that same passion to my photography. Let's create images that celebrate who you are and what you stand for. Visit amyboylephotography.com to schedule your session today. Welcome to the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast. I'm your host, Amy Boyle. Today we're going beyond the headlines with journalist and editor Jillian Melero, a second-generation New Yorican and first-generation college graduate. Jillian is the founder of Connect Puerto Rico, a newsletter tackling Puerto Rico's transition to renewable energy. She believes journalism isn't just about reporting problems, it's about finding solutions, fostering community, and making real impact. From covering immigration resources in Chicago to bridging policy gaps in Puerto Rico, Jillian's work is a masterclass in solutions-focused storytelling. If you care about media that informs, empowers, and drives change, this episode is for you. This is the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast. Welcome to the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, Jillian. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
I cannot wait for you to introduce your phenomenal self to our listeners.
Thanks so much. So my name is Jillian Melero. I like to introduce myself as a second-generation New Yorican, for those who know, a first-generation college graduate. And then for work, I am a journalist, a news editor, and I am the founder of Connect Puerto Rico.
As we are going to dig into all of that, I can't wait to learn a little bit more about your journey into journalism.
I like to tell people that I blame Anthony Bourdain for my journey into journalism, and I always will. And I also joke that I didn't actually know what journalism was when I got into it, which those things go hand in hand. I got into journalism because I was not satisfied with the work I was doing pre-journalism, which was a mix of retail, food service, customer service, regular 9-to-5 jobs or not 9-to-5 jobs, trying to make ends meet kind of jobs. And, I worked really hard and I did well at my jobs. I learned a lot. I pushed myself, but I never really got to where I wanted to be in any of the positions I was in. I wasn't really fulfilled by the work I was trying to do. And with all that, it still wasn't helping me to kind of achieve the goals that I wanted for myself. So I was definitely looking for something else. And after I met my partner, we had a big discussion about, should I go back to college? And if I do that, what am I going to do? And, we had that conversation because of me seeing Anthony Bourdain on TV. I didn't know what he was doing. I just knew I wanted to do it. I didn't know what he was or what to call him. And I don't think he would have called himself a journalist. But I wanted to do what he was doing in that he was kind of traveling the world, experiencing new cultures, meeting different people, challenging his own perceptions and challenging his own knowledge of what he knew of those cultures and those people, and just bringing that to the world in probably one of the most authentic and humble ways possible. I wanted to do that. I wanted to be a part of that, whatever that was. So I started reading his books and getting into everything that he did. And I had kind of told myself, I'm either going to get into journalism somehow, or I'm going to become a chef. I haven't really decided which one it was going to be yet. Or I just wanted to pick up a skill that I knew I could travel with and that, I would get those experiences out of. But culinary school is very expensive. And at that point in time, going back to college was probably the easiest thing. Going back to community college was the easiest thing. And so I ended up going with journalism, which doesn't sound super glamorous. It doesn't sound like all those things you hear from capital J journalists when they say, I wanted to come uphold democracy and I wanted to be a voice for the voiceless and speak truth to power. It's like, I just wanted a job that I didn't hate. I think I got that with journalism in that it's given me a lot of different jobs and a lot of different opportunities and a lot of ways to continue challenging myself and a lot of ways to produce work that I feel good about and that I'm proud to be producing. So circuitous way of getting into it, but what I've gotten out of it has been more of what I was looking for.
What was that like for you when you first started to report?
I've always been the type of person who tries to listen more than they speak, at least in my personal life. So I've always been kind of a quiet observer type. I try to read the room, I guess is what I'm saying. And maybe that's part of that came also along with working customer service and retail, is just trying to kind of size things up and not overwhelm people, I guess. So there's that. But there's also talking to people about their stories. There's just it's an exercise in empathy, I think, a lot of the time. I don't like to push people if they seem like they're uncomfortable, which I guess as a journalist, you're supposed to be going after the story at all costs, right? But I don't like to think of an interview as an interview. I always like to think of it as, hey, I'm just talking to somebody or hanging out with them for the day. That's kind of how I approach it, more so than it's an interview and I need to extract something from you, I think is probably the best way I can put that. But also to say that I didn't do as much reporting. So I'm actually not as practiced at that part of it. I actually got right into editing right away. So most of the reporting I've actually done as a student. So I've had a lot more leeway, a lot more time to kind of develop my way of doing that, because I haven't had to do it on a day-to-day breaking news basis. And I haven't had to do it as a representative of a particular outlet. I've basically been able to walk into most experiences as just me and just be me, which again, I think goes back to the Bourdain thing about like this authenticity and this sincerity about who you are as a person and just being that person 100% of the time, as opposed to like, this is Jillian with my journalist hat on, or this is Jillian with my retail or my customer service hat on. Like the manner of speaking might change from person to person, but the sentiment behind that doesn't, and the way you receive people or respond to people doesn't necessarily change. That is pretty consistent throughout. If who I am stays who I am. So that doesn't change through reporting or anything else.
The idea of starting Connect Puerto Rico, it's a combination of all these things. So tell us more about the newsletter that it is, the goal, and its backstory.
Connect Puerto Rico, a relatively new endeavor. I think we kind of started in earnest in 2023, but the seed for the idea was planted in about 2018 or 2019. So to backtrack it all the way, I'm Puerto Rican, New Yorican. So I was born in New York, but my family's Puerto Rican. So I used to visit a lot when I was a kid. But I didn't really know much about Puerto Rico or its history or its relationship with the U.S. and how that affected things. So when I was in journalism school, I did my associates, my bachelor's, and then my master's at Medill here in Chicago. And I was in the health, environment, and science specialization. And when you're in the health, environment, and science specialization at Medill, for your third or fourth quarter, you have to do an embedded reporting master's project. For the embedded reporting, you choose a science lab that you want to work with, and you spend some time with them and then you report back. And I was trying to figure out what lab I wanted to work with. And I spoke with Carrie Lighterson at Medill, who every year takes a cohort of students to Puerto Rico. Now, Carrie Lighterson runs the investigative journalism programs and the social justice program at Medill, or some of them. So with those two lenses, Carrie takes a cohort of students to Puerto Rico every year. And a lot of what she talks about there are environmental justice issues. So I spoke with her and I asked her if she could help connect me with some people in Puerto Rico that I could speak with during my time there. I didn't necessarily want to go with just one lab or location, but I was just trying to see who I could meet. And Carrie connected me with a lovely woman by the name of Marla Perez Lugo, who was basically like my hostess and fixer the entire time I was there. Marla was one of the co-founders of an organization called INESI. That's the Spanish acronym. In English, the name of the organization is the National Institute for Island Energy and Sustainability. They no longer exist, unfortunately, due to a lack of funding, and that has nothing to do with the current administration, but they did lose funding. Anyhow, I spent time with them, and for context of this time frame, this was, like I said, 2018, 2019, so this is coming out of during the recovery efforts for Hurricane Maria in 2017. So this was trying to rebuild the energy grid and energy infrastructure in Puerto Rico at this point in time. The media narrative at that time, when it came to Puerto Rico and the Maria recovery efforts, was about rebuilding and reinventing Puerto Rico to be like this renewable energy utopia. That was a big narrative at the time. So much so that you saw major headlines, lots of headlines about, Elon Musk is dropping solar panels and Tesla batteries and whatnot into Puerto Rico, and we're going to rebuild the energy grid. It's going to be great. So I went in at that time feeling pretty optimistic about what I was going to see. And I had, these ideas of Puerto Rico as a renewable energy utopia and as a prototype for all this future tech that we were going to start seeing. And of course, I left feeling less optimistic about those ideas. And I think the biggest eye opener was a meeting I got to attend there, again, fly on the wall at this meeting. But it was with the Puerto Rican Manufacturers Association and the Clinton Global Initiative. And the three big takeaways I got from the meeting, you'll find this on the Connect Puerto Rico website. Three big takeaways I got from the meeting were the idea of why is the renewable energy transition not happening? Why have we not already repaired the electric grid? What are the issues? And it was one, aging infrastructure. A lot of the new technology just wouldn't integrate with the existing infrastructure. So they couldn't even use it. They couldn't use those solar panels and batteries that were being dropped in. Two, it was the lack of a trained workforce. The economy in Puerto Rico has not been great. Jobs have not been great. There's been a brain drain happening for years. So a lot of the skilled labor has been leaving Puerto Rico for the States or for other countries. So they just don't have the engineering workforce there that they would have to support fixing the infrastructure or updating the infrastructure. So then the solution to that would be, three, to bring in an outside workforce. The issue, of course, in bringing an outside workforce is the total lack of local knowledge and of being able to quickly and efficiently deal with challenges on the ground. So a lot of the companies doing the work now are coming from Canada or from other areas. A lot of them don't even speak Spanish. So there's a lot of issues there with even just who comes in to do this work now. These were three really big issues, and it kind of stuck with me after I left Puerto Rico. And I didn't think about Connect Puerto Rico as it is now right away. But I knew with these issues in mind that there was something I wanted to do to address it, and I just didn't know what. And so I came back from my embed. I reported on this issue. That ended up being published with the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. So that was my master's project. And of course, I graduated at that point. So it wasn't a storyline I was able to follow professionally for a while because I was getting into work. That included getting a job with a digital nonprofit called Climate Central. Climate Central focuses on reporting on climate change, weather events. Their staff is mostly meteorologists, so they work with freelance reporters, and I used to work with them, contract on partnerships and collaborations. So I started to get an understanding of how to tell local and national stories for each audience, of how to localize a national story, how to nationalize a local story, how to combine data with narratives, how to find data to support a narrative, or how to pull the narrative out of data. So that was all really interesting work because I didn't even know science communication and reporting in that way and internal reporting in that way was an option. And so I learned a great deal from that, and I took some of that with me into Connect Puerto Rico. After Connect Puerto Rico, I started working with WTTW News here in Chicago. So that is their PBS affiliate. And so they have a nightly news broadcast called Chicago Tonight. And I was working on the digital team as a digital producer and editor. And so I'd work with the digital reporters, but I'd also take the broadcast from that evening and get it out onto our platforms on social and into our newsletter. So that was actually my first time working on a newsletter, was working on the newsletter for PBS. And so I did that on a daily basis. And then coming out of VTTW, I started working for Borderless Magazine here in Chicago. Borderless Magazine covers immigration and immigrant communities in Chicago. And that's kind of where I went back to, again, like the human element of this reporting, which was connecting with people from the individual communities and connecting with community advocacy organizations and really understanding how necessary those relationships were to do the work that we were doing at the level that we were doing. So again, all these elements of just, first it's the science reporting and then local versus national stories and then the data and the narrative. And then it's how do these stories get out to people and what are the channels that we use to get them out to people? And then it's going back to the human element of who are the people we need at the table to tell these stories the way they need to be told, but not just to tell the stories, but to make sure that we're getting the results that we want from telling these stories, to make sure that it's driving the kind of action that we want, because we don't just tell the stories to tell the stories. We tell the stories because we want them to have an impact. So how do we get to that impact? So there's all these elements I've been thinking about at each of these jobs and all these things that I've been learning that I now get to bring into Connect Puerto Rico. But Connect Puerto Rico didn't materialize the way it is now until 2023. So coming out of those jobs, I saw an opportunity at CUNY, City University of New York. CUNY has the Craig Newmark J School at CUNY, and they have a program called the Entrepreneurial Journalism Creators Program, the EJCP. And so when you go into the EJCP, it's, I think, a 3-month program, and they ask you to pitch an idea for either a website, a podcast, or a newsletter. And I went with a newsletter thinking that would be the lowest lift for me as far as software and hardware technology needs and whatnot. And of course, I had this seed of an idea about doing something Puerto Rico related. So at the time, I was just calling it the Puerto Rico Project. I had no idea what it was yet. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm going to try and create a newsletter, and I'm going to try to create it built on this idea for these issues that I've been thinking about for the last 5 years or so. And so, yes, that is the circuitous path from my master's project to the skills I picked up at work to the opportunity to all of a sudden put that all together into one project. And if CUNY hadn't actually just made us write a manifesto and publish it, I'm not sure I would have even made the jump yet. I had to already, by the end of the program, they had to say, write it up and put it out there in the universe. And I said, oh, really? The universe is going to know this is something I'm working on already? Okay. And that was wild because I didn't feel like I even had anything to show for it at the time, but I had to put the idea out there of like, okay, this is something that matters to me, and this is why I think it matters, and this is what I'm going to try and do about it.
Well, and what a perfect way to like leap and the net will appear. Like you had all the things there. And I think when we're too close to the projects that we are in, it's hard to see that we're a lot further along than we ever give ourselves credit for. So I think in that sense, you were primed and ready to leap. And when it comes to taking that newsletter now, and it's been around for 2 years plus, and its main goals being to bridge gaps between policymakers, investors, and community leaders. How is that going? Where are efforts still needed?
I would say, I mean, as far as the Puerto Rico thing goes, it's a long and complicated process. I'm still learning every day about how to get involved and how things are shifting and who the players are and what the needs are. So that, yeah, it's just a lot. So yeah, there is this element, like I'm saying, trying to build this community of stakeholders that can help create change, right? Because there's an element of it that it is about policy, of course. It's about making sure the right policies are in place, policies that support the development of this technology, that support infrastructure development, workforce development, and what have you. There's the policy part. There's the funding part. As we know, federal funding might be a little bit more of an issue these days. So I think that's a lot of why people kind of look to private investment and philanthropy to kind of supplement some of those issues. So there's an element of wanting those people to be at the table as well. And then, of course, like I said, the underlying part of this, the part that matters the most, is making sure that it's not just about shifting policy and it's not just about getting funding, but that all of this is being informed at the community level by the people who are being affected the most, by the people who are being directly affected. So it's one thing for me to say that I think things should be done XYZ way, but that's what I think doesn't matter. I'm trying to be informed by experts in Puerto Rico, people on the ground level, community advocates, local leaders, local experts, because it's not just about launching renewable energy. It's about doing it in a way that is sustainable and resilient and also accountable to the community. So accountable to Puerto Ricans. I keep saying it's about not just the grid, but it's about strengthening Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans. There's an element of this that I want to make sure gets across to people about, like, we kind of see the policy moving in that direction anyway. We kind of see technology moving in that direction anyway, whether it takes time. But yeah, it's really about how it's informed and how it's executed. And I hate to say it, I don't want to gentrify Puerto Rico, right? That's the thing we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid things being done in a way that takes away from the culture there.
That makes perfect sense. And just all the things you were saying previously about dropping in solar and batteries that don't work with the existing grid, but then to understand the people who are currently living there, what they want and what they can do.
I think that's what I was saying, especially with learning from Borderless and my work there, and now also with the Sun Times, in working with groups on the ground, people who are already in the communities, people who have already been doing the work for decades, who know where the pain points are, who know what the issues are. That's what I'm really trying to do with Connect Puerto Rico. It isn't just about me pushing out information about this thing, right? That's one element. That's the first layer. But the other thing is building this community so that it can be collaborative and it can be informed from people who know what's going on. So that, it really means a lot to me to make sure that there are Puerto Rican community leaders, Puerto Rican experts, engineers, educators, academics, whoever you consider an expert to be, that they're involved in the conversation. Connect Puerto Rico is also meant not just to connect these stakeholders, right? So community leaders, policymakers, business investors, right? Not necessarily all Puerto Rican, but also to connect members of the Puerto Rican diaspora, right? So one of the first things I did was reach out to Camille Padilla-Dalmau. She runs Nueve Millones, which is another Puerto Rican independent outlet. I always mention this because of the name of her outlet, which is Nueve Millones, which gets right at it. She's 9 million. There are 9 million Puerto Ricans in the world. 3 million are in Puerto Rico. So twice as many of us just out in the world doing our thing as there are in Puerto Rico. That's a tremendous network. That's a tremendous network that is outside of Puerto Rico that can also feed back into Puerto Rico. And like I mentioned earlier, I never really had a strong sense of my Puerto Rican roots, having been born and raised in New York and then New Jersey and then South Florida. That was another element, going back to the human side of it, not just the tech and science and investment side of it, but going back to, I really want to connect these communities. Like when I lived in New York, our Puerto Rican community was kind of built in. When I lived in New Jersey, Puerto Rican community was kind of built in. Moved to South Florida, not so much. And side note, and I've mentioned this to people, and this is what I mean. The sense of community I get from being a New Yorican or a Puerto Rican, it just doesn't exist anywhere else. So when my family and I moved from New York and New Jersey, and, I was a kid, we didn't move alone. We moved with our entire neighborhood. So we caravan down as like 4 or 5 families with kids, all Puerto Rican families. All of us had lived in New York and New Jersey for years. We all moved to Florida together. So I got the privilege of my childhood friends from New York and New Jersey still being my childhood friends when we moved to Florida. And I just can't imagine that happening in this day and age, or to very many people, or very many people having that experience. But I always say when I came to Florida that I never felt that sense of community again that we had in New York and New Jersey. Right. And maybe I was just in the wrong part of Florida, but it's something I always try to recapture. And so there was a thought of that going into Connect Puerto Rico as well. It's like, I don't feel connected to my people. I know my people are also kind of scattered all about. And so that was something I also realized here. So coming from South Florida to Chicago, I actually was not aware there was a big Puerto Rican community in Chicago before I moved here. So that would be here in Humboldt Park. In South Florida, it happens to be in the central area, like Kissimmee. In New York, I don't know, I was in the Bronx. Some states in New York. And then doing my research for Connect Puerto Rico, I learned there's also a big Puerto Rican hub in Philadelphia. And then just anecdotally, a lot of my friends and family have moved in recent years to Texas, which I'm curious as to why Texas is becoming a draw for Puerto Ricans right now. But basically, I know that there are hubs of Puerto Rican communities in other places. I'm starting to learn that. And that was confirmed, I would say maybe last year with a visit from CPI. So CPI is the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, so the Center for Investigative Journalism based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. They came to visit Medill, which was lovely, which gave me an opportunity to connect with them last year. And they had launched a diaspora reporting project, which for me was a huge affirmation that I was on the right track of this idea of like wanting to connect these diaspora hubs and do reporting for them or about them. So there's an element of that in Connect Puerto Rico as well. It's not just stakeholders who might be interested in investing in Puerto Rico, or stakeholders who might be interested in shaping policy in Puerto Rico. The community that's outside of Puerto Rico that can also have an impact on what happens in Puerto Rico. And Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico can't vote for president, for example. Puerto Ricans in the U.S. can. So there's part of this idea of trying to keep us all informed about these challenges and trying to keep us all on the same page, and then trying to open up that conversation of how do we handle this as a larger community, as a global community, or at least a nationwide community, and not just a community within Puerto Rico. And that's a really big, important part of this.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey there, Phenomenal listeners. It's Amy Boyle. If you're loving the stories and insights on the Speaking of Phenomenal podcast, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Good Pods. Your 5-star reviews help us reach even more people and keep bringing you great content. Thank you so much for your support and being a part of our phenomenal community. Now back to the show.
Well, I will make sure that everything that you're talking about is listed in the show notes so people can understand that it isn't just a newsletter, to your point exactly. It's all these elements. And again, it's the storytelling from the people, the culture, and then obviously the environmental impact and hopefully the benefits of the right technology coming in to make the space a more equitable place to live for everybody as well. Switching gears a little bit, I wanted to make sure that in recent weeks I saw on your LinkedIn talking about your Chicago Immigration Resource Guide. It's such a vital piece of information. It must also be a living, breathing document as things continue to change. So maybe if you would be so kind as to tell our listeners a little bit more about what that project is, and also thinking outside of Chicago, where might people who want to know more find resources?
The Immigration Resource Guide was a project started by the Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Public Media. And right now, that organization, Chicago Public Media, includes Chicago Sun-Times, so the newspaper, La Voz Chicago, which is the Spanish language arm, and WBEZ Chicago, which is the radio. And they approached me, I guess, also because of I work with Connect Puerto Rico and my background, my experience with Borderless Magazine, covering immigration, immigrant communities, and doing exactly these kind of resource guides and whatnot. They basically said, we have this project. There's going to be a lot of moving parts to it. Can you help us kind of rein everything in? And I said, sure, I'd love to. So this is their project very much. I'm lucky to have gotten to take part in it, and I'm still working on it. So the Immigration Resource Guide very much comes out of the groundwork laid by the Chicago Sun-Times. They held a series of listening sessions in the community in and around Chicago, Pilsen and various other neighborhoods. So we've had a lot of influx of book migrants coming in, asylum seekers and whatnot over the last few years, especially under the current political environment. For those who don't know, a lot of them have been sent here by Governor Greg Abbott in Texas, who started sending immigrants to sanctuary cities as a political statement a few years back. So a lot of people have been arriving in Chicago, not necessarily super informed about what they were coming into and arriving in Chicago. So yeah, Chicago is a sanctuary city and having protections in place. We are seeing an influx of immigrants. Again, the environment being what it is, funding now being cut to a lot of resources, misinformation being as prevalent as it is. Sometimes spoke with these communities and with a lot of community advocacy organizations. I'm just like, how can we help? It's a difficult time. What can we do to help? And a lot of that started with, what are some of the most frequently asked questions? What are you hearing from people in the community? What do they need? What do they want? What do they have trouble understanding? What do they need help navigating? They surveyed, I want to say, at least 30 community advocacy organizations and people who work there, and sent them survey questions and polls and whatnot to try and get this information. And what the editorial team at Sun Times did was then go through all these responses and try to categorize them into, just try to make it a little bit simple, basically like housing, legal, whatever questions. So the project starts from that with basically just what are the most frequently asked questions that people who are arriving in Chicago from other countries, what are the most frequently asked questions they have about getting themselves situated in Chicago? So the resource guide is a combination of answers to those difficult questions and the most frequently asked questions. So it's a combination of resources that are available, but also trying to guide people through different legal processes or application processes that might be pretty tricky. And also, the effort of this is also to make it be bilingual. So I think which was also pretty unique to this is just that bilingual, not just because it's not just the Spanish speaking community we want to address with this, but you have people like me who do, English is my first language, but my family does speak primarily Spanish. So you're talking a lot to those people too, like to members of the family or to next gen members of the family who help support the family as they're arriving or help support them with language or whatnot. So we're not just talking to new arrivals, we're talking to the people who take care of them, right? Which is the other importance of this being a bilingual resource. But as far as how to help, again, similar as what we said about Puerto Rico, right? There's elements of policy and there's elements of funding. So, like vote, donate, sure. But as far as getting people what they really need, it's talking to those community advocacy organizations on the ground and the people who already do the work and asking them, because they are doing the work, what is it that people need? How can we help? What can we do about it? And then listening and then actually trying to provide that. Again, in our case, we're just asking the questions people have been asking, and then we're going to try and bring that information to people and clarify it, make it easy to access. And it is a challenging project because these are complicated processes. Like I was saying earlier, this is definitely trying to give people something that is a service. So whether it is a list of active resources where people can find assistance for affordable housing, public assistance with food, public assistance with healthcare, that kind of thing. At the same time, we're also trying to explain legal processes and other processes to people. What can you do to build your credit score? Especially if you don't have documentation. How can you establish credit? How can you get your finances in order if you don't have certain things in place? These kind of things, explaining how to. So it's a much simpler, much more service-driven thing than what journalists normally do. And I think that's what I love about it, is that it doesn't have to be a big, complicated narrative or a story. It's just helping people find what they need and answering their questions. So I think that's what I appreciate about it most. And I think the partnerships are vital for that, to understand what it is that people need and how to get it to them. And so that's why I do like I said, working with advocacy organizations to make sure that everything's relevant.
And I like what you said about driving integral change, not just sharing a story to share the narrative, but what this is solutions journalism, and to show people like it could just be a list of resources, but it's been reported, it's verified, it's checked, it's the links aren't dead. They're going to take you somewhere. There's someone on the other side that can listen and understand and help with that. Would you say that there's more of a push towards that, or are you leaning more towards groups that lead with that mindset versus just headlines? Because we know that gets eyeballs and, ears on articles and stuff. But as far as really directing change, tell me, what do you think about more solution-based reporting?
I love it. I'm a big proponent of it. So there's like the Solutions Journalism Network is a big organization. And I've carried that kind of ethos with me ever since I learned about them and who they are. And I would say I'm one of the few people, again, because of my partner's support, I'm one of the few people who has the luxury of picking projects that actually really mean something to me or that I'm passionate about. So I don't do any work I don't want to do, going back to not doing a job that I hate. Yes, I do tend to lean towards or favor that kind of work. So that's something I do seek out. I don't know if it's as prevalent in journalism as I would like it to be. I think it's prevalent here in Chicago. And that was one of the big motivating factors for me in moving here for grad school. It wasn't even just grad school itself, because I hadn't even considered graduate school at the time that I had applied. I had never considered it before. So it wasn't really like a huge priority for me to come to grad school. It was just something that people recommended. And so I went along with it. But in that, I didn't just jump, right? Like I said, my journey through J school was about 10 years long. So I didn't just move quickly on things. I put a lot of time and consideration into the choices I was making. And my choice to come to Chicago came out of the culture I was seeing here that was building in media in particular. But I'll even backtrack it a little bit more and say that, like, the first time I even heard the phrase community organizing was in reference to Chicago. And that was actually, of course, during when Obama was campaigning for president. And I would hear all these stories in the media about why his campaign was so successful and what made it so refreshing and what made it why it was so impactful on people, why it made such an impression. And they kept saying, oh, he comes from a background of community organizing in Chicago. And I didn't even know what that was at the time. I was like, what's community organizing? What does that look like? Who are these communities? What are we organizing for? And I wanted to learn more about that. And so I started doing research about, I guess, just the news organizations here as well when I started thinking about grad school and coming out of grad school and what the environment was going to look like here in Chicago. It's like, what was I going to do with myself after school, really? Because I didn't plan on going back to Florida after grad school. And I'll say that, yeah, that culture of community organizing is very unique to Chicago. CPI said the same thing when they started doing their diaspora reporting project. Instead of all the communities we've talked to, there's something unique happening here in Chicago where it has a much larger impact on the community, on what people do, and on taking action. They don't see that anywhere else. So there's a culture of community organizing that is very vital here in Chicago, that is also influencing media here, that makes that very exciting. So I think that's probably a unique thing about media here. I don't know if I'm seeing that as much in other places, but to me, that's what journalism always should have been, is service to the community. I don't really understand it as anything else. I'm definitely trying to do more of that with Connect Puerto Rico, even though right now it's a very small, curated newsletter, like we're just getting started with stuff. The end game is to get to something like that. And so I've been very inspired, especially by City Bureau here in Chicago and what they do, you know, having launched like their documentaries program and everything, which I think is, as far as a civic engagement, it's just genius and so impressive. Such an impressive program that they've been able to put together. And I've been so inspired by that. For me, their focus is not on the storytelling. Their focus is on impact and serving the community. And they won a Pulitzer for their reporting last year. So, I mean, you can do both. You can be a service to the community and still do this top level journalism that gets all this recognition and accolades and whatnot. And it can still be something as simple as, hey, we put together some resources for people. It can still start from that. So yeah, that is a big inspiration. And journalism that doesn't serve the community doesn't make sense to me. At that point, it's kind of more egocentric almost.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time today, and certainly will be sharing all the links of the different organizations that you've been talking about, the outlets that are doing this solutions-based journalism, this listening and sharing of skills and resources, and the list goes on. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been great to catch up with you.
Thank you, Amy. I'm so happy to have been here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Speaking of Phenomenal. Be sure to subscribe, rate, review, and even share the podcast, as well as stay tuned for more inspiring conversations. Remember, each and every one of you is capable of extraordinary things. Until next time, take care and remember, you are phenomenal.